Are you afraid of hell? Most people carry some version of this fear beneath the surface, even those who claim no religious belief at all. Sometimes the real story is not the punishment itself, but who decided what counts as one. Hell is not a place. That line sounds like something scrawled by a rebellious teenager or an internet atheist, yet it is the actual position of Thomas Aquinas and Augustine of Hippo, two of the most rigorous minds Christian theology ever produced. Both insisted hell is not a location on any map, but a condition, separation from God, a rupture in relationship rather than a coordinate. Which raises the only question that actually matters here. If it is not a place you go to, where exactly have you already been? Most people picture fire that never exhausts itself, a courtroom scene after death, a location built for punishment. That image has been reinforced for centuries through sermon and painting, through depictions designed less to inform than to terrify a congregation into obedience. But notice what that picture quietly does. It locates the problem outside the person, in some future geography, arriving only after death, rather than in anything happening right now, in this ordinary Tuesday, in this argument with a sibling, in this hour of scrolling a phone looking for relief that never quite lands. Strip away that convenient externalization, and something less comfortable remains. Hell becomes disharmony itself, the condition of being at war with what is actually in front of you. Understanding that requires no belief in an afterlife at all, only the willingness to watch ordinary suffering closely enough to see its actual shape, the shape it takes in a traffic jam, in a mirror, in a silence after an unanswered message. Consider the oldest account available of how that war begins. Picture a garden in which nothing is wrong, not because every difficulty has been resolved, but because the category of wrongness has not yet been invented. This is the strange claim buried inside the story of Eden, and it rewards closer reading than it usually receives. Before the fall, man and world exist without a gap between what is and what ought to be, because no yardstick yet exists by which the gap could be measured. There is no comparison happening, no silent ranking of this moment against a better one. Then comes the fruit, and its name is not incidental. It is called the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, not the fruit of knowledge as such. Adam already knows the names of animals and the shape of the land before eating it. What this fruit adds is narrower and more dangerous, the power to sort experience into acceptable and unacceptable, sufficient and lacking. Ask what actually changes the instant it is eaten. Not the trees, not the light, not the body itself, which remains exactly what it was a moment earlier. What changes is entirely internal, a new capacity to hold reality against a standard and pronounce it lacking. This is why Adam's first reaction is not wisdom but shame, covering a body that was identical a moment earlier and is now, suddenly, a problem requiring concealment. Nothing was added to the world. A filter was installed in the mind, through which the world would now be processed, permanently. Centuries later, and working from an entirely different set of assumptions, Epictetus reached the identical structural claim that people are disturbed not by events themselves, but by the judgments they form about those events. A fall from wealth is simply a change in circumstance. The belief that poverty constitutes catastrophe is manufactured afterward, in the mind. And it is that manufactured belief, not the poverty itself, that produces the suffering. Notice how precisely this mirrors Eden, the garden before the fall, is a world encountered without any added verdict. The garden after is a world processed through a mind that has learned to grade everything it touches, and once that grading begins, it rarely stays confined to one object. Adam judges his own body, then almost immediately judges Eve for offering the fruit, then implicitly questions the very placement of the tree. Original sin, stripped of any requirement for belief, is not a stain inherited through blood. It is a capacity, switched on the instant a mind gains the power to measure reality against an ideal and a temptation, because that power will now be exercised on everything it encounters, starting with the person's own body and rippling outward from there. If judgment is what closed the gate, hell, read honestly, is the perpetuation of exactly that conflict between what is and what should be, with no resolution available, because the demand itself never rests. There is no neutral choice sitting between accepting what is present and quietly insisting it should be otherwise. Every hour contains a small verdict one way or the other. Spinoza pushes this further than comfort allows, arguing that suffering originates in imagining events could have unfolded differently, when everything follows with total necessity from the causes that produced it. Read that claim slowly, because it asks something harder than mere acceptance. It means the alternate version of events a person grieves over, the version where the diagnosis came back clean, or the marriage did not end, never actually had any chance of occurring, given everything that preceded it. The grief is real, its object is fiction. Freedom, on this account, is understanding necessity clearly enough that the fictional alternative stops being generated in the first place. Nietzsche refuses to stop at mere acceptance, demanding instead amor fati, an active love of one's fate, exactly as it occurred, past and present and whatever comes next, with no silent addendum that it should have gone another way. This mechanism rarely feels like judgment from the inside. It feels like accuracy, like simple perception of a flawed situation, which is precisely why the serpent needs no force, only a suggestion persuasive enough that acting on it feels like the person's own private discovery, rather than a seed planted from outside. Why does chasing satisfaction through changed circumstance fail so reliably that an honest person should have stopped expecting otherwise by now? Schopenhauer's answer is blunt. Satisfied desire produces a brief lull, then boredom, then a new desire to escape that boredom, and the wheel does not slow down. It merely changes which spoke happens to be turning. The person who finally secures the promotion feels relief, measured in weeks before attention shifts to the next title up the ladder. Modern neuroscience gives this a mechanism rather than a mood, through hedonic adaptation, in which the brain recalibrates to any repeated pleasure and simply demands more input to produce the same output as before. This is not a failure of gratitude. It is closer to a design constraint built into the machinery itself. Picture a bag with a hole worn through its bottom. Pour more in, and it does not fill. It passes through faster, and the person holding it concludes, wrongly, that the answer is to pour harder still. The Buddhist term tanha names this loop directly as the root of dukkha, and the precision of that naming matters, because the diagnosis is not that desire itself is evil, but that this specific architecture of craving consumes its own resolution, converting every satisfied want immediately into the seed of the next one, so the pursuit never actually terminates in the state it promises. Call the resulting inner monologue the serpent's voice, the running commentary that scans reality continuously and files verdicts against it. This is wrong. That needs fixing before anything here can be acceptable. Epictetus offers a tool sharp enough to cut directly into this voice, the dichotomy of control. Judgments and responses sit entirely within a person's power. Almost everything else, other people's opinions, outcomes, already set in motion, the weather itself does not. Suffering is what happens when these two categories get confused. When a person spends their only real lever trying to move something that was never theirs to move in the first place. Surrender, properly understood here, is not resignation and not passive tolerance of injustice. It is the active refusal to keep feeding a judgment that produces nothing but additional suffering, while still acting wherever genuine agency remains available. Buddhist non-attachment approaches the same insight from a different angle, not the absence of desire, but the refusal to treat any single desire as an absolute truth that must be satisfied before peace becomes permissible. Taoism adds its own inflection through Wu Wei, action without forcing, valuing movement with the grain of what is actually happening, rather than constant strain against the natural direction of events. Has anyone actually lived this, even briefly, or is it only theory, confined to old texts? Almost everyone has known some moment of total acceptance, and the striking thing is how rarely that moment depended on every problem being solved first. The internal demand simply went quiet on its own, without permission being formally granted, during an ordinary walk, a conversation, a meal eaten without hurry. Heidegger and Sartre gave this a name: authenticity, living fully inside the present rather than constantly projecting lack onto an imagined future that may never arrive on schedule. This distinguishes seeking, a mode of living organized around rejecting the present in the name of a future payoff that keeps receding, from acting out of fullness, where the identical outward behavior proceeds without lack as its engine. A person can build the same career, raise the same family, create the same work from either posture, and only the internal architecture differs. Paradise, on this reading, was never a distant destination, reachable through one more correct adjustment to circumstance. It is a disposition, available exactly here, inside whatever this moment happens to contain, however imperfect that moment appears on paper, which leaves a plainer question than any of the philosophy stacked above it. The next time some small judgment rises through an ordinary hour, this should be different. This is not enough. Pause before believing it automatically, and ask whether the voice making that claim is actually correct or merely loud. Letting go of that constant verdict is not losing a life. It is the first honest attempt at living one.